Hello, my name is Bonnie Greenball Silvestri, and I work at USF Sarasota Manatee, where I teach a course called Ending Homelessness: How Can We Work Towards Social Change? I am joined today by two amazing advocates on behalf of the homeless community. First, Richard Martin, who is the Executive Director of the Suncoast Partnership to End Homelessness and currently working on Step Up, End Homelessness Now in Sarasota County, and Steve Lundberg, who is the author of a book entitled Street Logic, in which he examines the plight of the homeless in Boston community. And today we're going to have a wonderful discussion about what's currently affecting our community in terms of the homeless and how we can help them arrive out of this current situation. Richard, you just released Step Up yesterday, and we are very pleased that this is going to be affecting and impacting our community for the 10 years to come. So could you give us a description of the Step Up plan and what you're planning to accomplish in our community?
Yes, we're hot off the trail and very excited. We feel there's a fire in the belly in this community to do better in addressing homelessness in the community. So we released Step Up to the press and the public yesterday. It's been a process over the course of the year, working with over 600 community members to really understand the barriers that homeless people face in this community, understand better how to prevent homelessness, collaborate among agencies, among builders and bankers and businesses, et cetera, to really end homelessness and prevent homelessness in the community. So we're excited. It's a 10-year plan, but we start day one. And so today, in a sense, is the first day of the rest of the story. We look forward to giving you a sense of some of the overviews and objectives we're going to achieve as we go forward today, hopefully. Right?
Wonderful, and we were so delighted to be joined by Steve Sundberg on this very important day. He also gave a talk yesterday at the Sarasota County Library about his book Street Logic, which is one of the most, as we know, closely observed depictions of homelessness. So can you talk a little bit about what prompted you to write this wonderful fiction novel about homelessness, which is quite unique? We really don't see much of this kind of examination in the fiction format. And give us a little bit more description of what your work has been about.
Sure. Well, I would have to say that as a writer, the job is to tell the truth. And I've worked for many years in Boston, Massachusetts, as a in the field of human services, which is basically the frontline caretakers in various social service positions. And I spent maybe close to 15 years working with homeless people in different levels in homeless shelters and assisted living facilities. And for 5 years I worked on the street. So I felt, you know, I had to write something about it. It was an outrageous situation, and it was a tough battle. So, you know, I congratulate you guys for getting the community involved, because that's what it takes.
You bring a really unique perspective because of your vast years of experience, and additionally the fact that you've been examining it in this way for the novel. I know you're a strong proponent of housing first. Can you talk a little bit about that, and then we'll look at how Sarasota is planning to engage in that plan as well? Sure.
I think housing first is the result of many years of people trying to figure out how can we help this person on the street get housing. And in the past, and I think the first I heard of housing first was in the early 2000s, 2003 maybe, 2004. And it works in a different way than having the homeless person fill out a lot of paperwork and jump through a bunch of hoops and then have to wait another 6 months or a year for a room to open up. So Housing First took the approach of let's find this kind of housing and let's staff it so that it's safe, and let's be able to take people immediately in without asking them to change their lifelong habits of drinking or whatever they're doing, with the idea that little by little people will come in and will get to know this person, and they'll make the decision, but without forcing it directly on people.
Richard, can you talk a little bit about how we're going to incorporate something similar to that in our plan?
Yes, well, you know, housing is at the core of the plan. It's all about housing. Get that roof over your head first, and then we can start addressing other issues, challenges you may have. So housing first, both as a concept, or overarching concept about if you're homeless, get them a house. If that's an emergency room, shelter for them, start there, but move on through to more stable housing. In the case of housing first as really the model, it's working with particularly chronically homeless people that have mental illnesses, that have been on the streets a long time, don't have the comfort, the trust perhaps, the social skills to live with others, and for them to get them into a home so they finally have the security, their own place, help pick out their own furniture, and can start thinking instead of here out a little farther than where they're going to sleep that night. It has shown to be really pretty remarkable in the successes that have been documented now. Over 32 academic studies have shown and proven how effective that is, both for the person, but for the taxpayer as well, a much less expensive way. So the housing component is really core to step up, along with other different initiatives and more collaborations with agencies too. It's all about housing for starters.
Mm-hmm. Well, today's day one of the plan, so when could we expect to see some of these changes implemented?
Well, we are happy to see that just the action of bringing people that don't typically sit around the same table together to the same table, through the workshops and listening sessions we've had, there's been clicks already, and ideas and initiatives already have begun. The City Commission of Sarasota has funded some community outreach teams based on a Daytona Beach model. The Salvation Army and Sarasota County Jail have worked out a program so there's someone to meet someone that's homeless when they're released from jail. There's emergency beds down in Venice and Englewood in cooperation with the American Red Cross. So just some simple low-hanging things have happened before we adopted the plan. This is going to be a process of continuing to shop the plan with community leaders and community groups to build the consensus over the next 3 months or so. We will continue to roll out more information on our website, stepupsarasota.org, over the course of the week, and people will be able to get notified of those and review those, be able to comment, throw darts at the plan online, virtual darts, and through that process then we'll move up to the adoption stage, and at that point we want to take it to the county commissioners, the municipal commissioners, and other boards, elected boards and other bodies that are instrumental in this community. Because, you know, as we say that in a community, every person that lives in that community is a stakeholder, but with this plan we say they also have to be an ambassador for this plan. So, you know, if they haven't come to us, we're going to come to them. We have their name on it. And we have a lot of wonderful leadership and I think experience in reaching for excellence and achieving it in this community. So that's the next chapter, and I look forward to keeping you apprised of our progress. I'm confident in that progress.
Well, there's a real energy that comes around setting an intention and setting that goal. So now that we've put that on the table, I think that we should be able to start approaching that goal more readily.
Yeah, I think so, and you know, I think without a doubt, the most valuable part of the process that we had was that many people that were currently homeless or had been homeless, and to your point, Steve, that were part of the plan, and keeping it honest and say, wait a minute, this is how we see it, and you know, we're listening to that. So hopefully that is also embedded in everything here. That's where we need to turn to really understand what it is we can do and what the barriers really are. With our lives as homed people, housed people, we just really can begin to understand some of the challenges. So that's been a really important part. I think that's going to proof this and proof it over time if we continue that relationship with the people that are actually suffering in that position. The human face is very important to know.
Yes, I remember at a meeting that we both attended recently, one of the homeless people in the community was saying, well, maybe you should give it a try living outside for a week and see how you feel as a homeless person. And I thought to myself, even if I did that, I still couldn't really understand it because I know I can go back to my house. So there's really no way for us to really get a full psychic grasp on what that experience would be like. So that might be one of the challenges to implementing the plan.
And Steve, again, probably like you found out, I mean, every person is different, different stories, different needs, and there's some very big challenges about learning how to negotiate the world or not knowing how to. The new middle class homeless that really have never asked for help and they need to. There's just so many children and families, veterans with PSTD returning from the service, kids let out of foster care without really social skills, employment skills, etc. That's who comprises the homeless. And they all require different services, and they all require compassion, but then different sort of palette of services depending who they are. And that's what, again, we hope to be doing in here, is really setting up sort of universal case management and wraparound case management, so we really do much better in terms of preventing homelessness in the first place. And once we rehouse people, making sure they're stably housed for the long term. That's the overarching goal of the plan.
Steve?
Well, I think your point about it's more cost effective, I wanted to just say something about that. My angle on the streets and as an outreach worker was to try to get this person in. Now, a lot of times that person didn't want to go in, and over years of getting to know these people, it was, like you say, that it's a human face, they're each different, and we would start sometimes with just having coffee with them. Sometimes they wouldn't talk to us. So it took a while to build any kind of a relationship with them. And we had some tools, but we did not have that instant access to housing. We had instant access to a bed shelter or in a medical respite place, but then they would be back out on the street. So there was a doctor who did a study of a guy who came into an ER. He saw this guy over years, and he finally said, this man can't be, we're not solving this man's issue or helping him. And he counted up how many times he'd been in 1 year. He took a 1-year period, and it was like 265 days out of the year. And he added up how much that cost, the hospital and the ambulance running. He did his own little study. And based on that, he decided to commit the guy for some treatment and care. It sounds a little, it's an iffy subject of when do you pick someone up and take them in and when they're not asking for the help. So the man went into a place and he thrived. As his time came up, it was a hospital. They had to free that bed up. And what were they going to do with them then? And the best they could come up with was a halfway house. And at that point, he may have lasted a week or so there. And then he was right back downtown. So, but the point was, he liked the place and he wanted to stay, but the hospital needed to make room. They couldn't continue. They had extended it as long as possible. So I don't know what we can learn from that other than, in that man's case, the support system, it was there in many ways, and I think he probably would have stayed there.
Can you think about comparing what that experience was for the person while he was in the hospital, what kind of care he was receiving in comparison to having to go to the halfway house, and why there was that big shift in what he was able to achieve in both places?
Well, I think in the hospital he was contained. He felt contained, and technically he was contained because the doctor who had initiated this, up in Massachusetts, it's called a Section 8. It's the Baker Act here in Florida, where basically there is a legal paper that is mandating treatment. It's not jail, but it's treatment. And in that case, he couldn't get out of the hospital. And that brings up an incredible philosophical point about, because I used to think about the solution all the time for these people. And I thought, you know what, there are some out there that simply should be picked up as if it were your grandparents, you know, suddenly sleeping on a park bench in Boston, and you know, maybe you live in San Francisco, and then you hear about this thing, and you know, your brother or sister couldn't stop them. They just they lost their house, or they left, or whatever happened. But we wouldn't let our own family really stay out there. So you would go and get them, and you would Baker Act them, probably. Maybe, you know, it depends on the situation, but it sounds like enforced treatment, and in a sense it is. But this man who went in loved it and was thriving. They simply couldn't keep him any longer.
I like what you're saying about thinking about them as your grandparent, and if we think of ourselves as sort of a communal family, and how we could approach people who are less fortunate than ourselves and view them as if they are somehow related to us, because in a sense they all are.
As if they're family.
Yeah.
Right.
Richard, can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. So much to say. So little time. I think it really is worth repeating that homelessness, by and large, is invisible in our communities. We see a face of homeless, and it's often chronically homeless people that might be down on our main street or in our parks. That's 10% or so of the population, and that does require remarkable community outreach, building trust and services. There's so many populations, to think of 40% of the people homeless in our community are moms and kids, and we don't see them because they don't want to be seen as homeless, because there are all kinds of concerns about losing their kids, etc. The 1,200 plus children that are going to school today and homeless at night, couch surfing or whatever, but place to place to place, no way to grow up. The veterans, with over 50% of the returning veterans with post-traumatic stress syndrome, depression, that's an estimate. Clearly there's going to be issues of them dealing with stability and housing, homelessness, interacting with the criminal justice system, etc. So there are a lot of the special populations that we really identify in here as particular populations that we need to address, because everyone does have their own story, own human story, and they all need to be, like all of us, sort of be treated individually and sort of loved as individuals that we are too. It's a very challenge with too few resources. We have great agencies, programs, great people, caseworkers and others, but there's just too little food in the cupboard and no room at the inn. I mean, we have a real dearth of sufficient emergency housing beds and permanent housing beds, particularly, that are affordable in this community, and with supportive services and case management. We have a dearth of those. We don't fare well. And that's going to be one of our main aims. It's going to take that 10 years to build that housing stock and give way to people to move in from homelessness into an emergency, but on up into stable housing. And then with the skill sets to support that. That's the great hope for every individual in our community that's living in our community.
There was that sort of amazing aha moment in the course over the summer when you were there for the presentations, when one of the students realized that he would have been considered homeless because he had been living with his family. And this inspired him when he thought about the fact that he did have family to live with and that so many children didn't. And that kind of shifted his consciousness quite a bit. And I think that many, many people are very inspired by the fact that there are so many children who are living without a place to call home. So what's going to happen in terms of our most vulnerable population?
Well, it's true. There are a lot of single-parent families these days, many of them. There's a lot of children that don't know their families, that they don't get along within functional families, in foster care, clearly. That's a major population to focus upon. There are the Guardian Ad Litem and the Children's Guardian Fund. We're building partnerships as fast as we can with anyone that will listen. And they are. I mean, there's this sense of coming together that I haven't seen before, bringing it together to address these people with special needs, but in a much more collaborative way. Again, addressing veterans issues, there's more funding than there has been. We are a community that moved Pops, 76-year-old Pops, from Pirates Cove, a tent city, that had been closed down and are moving him into a permanent housing voucher because someone finally talked to him and found out he's a veteran and he gets a permanent housing voucher. There's lots of ways, and we're trying to bring all the tools that we have in the toolbox, plus add more tools to the toolbox with best practices nationwide, et cetera, and more volunteerism and more in-kindness and more involvement in the business community to really address these things. One is I've seen them happen here, us take on a challenge, whether it's supporting our schools or environmentally sensitive lands, what have you, and make it happen and pride ourselves on that excellence. I also know that we're doing a lot here, but not enough. I also know other communities that have stepped up and done remarkable things, and that Sarasotans are capable of doing that. So we look forward to the campaign, as it were. People seem to be getting on the bandwagon now that it's been built and started to roll. And as I say, I think it's going to be an exciting ride and a hopeful ride. Last night, as we do every longest night of the year, we read the names of those that have died homeless without an address in our community last year. And it's a pretty sad and sombering event and hopeless in some ways. So it was important yesterday that we released it, matched it with this hope of this 10-year plan and bringing the community together to do better. And we are hopeful we did so. Stay tuned. Yeah.
You had a very hopeful story that kind of transitioned in your book. So there was the story of the young man who had been homeless for a year, and then you were finally able to address his situation, and then he led you to being able to look at the situation of one of the other main characters in your book. So I thought maybe you could spend a few minutes talking about some of the transition that occurred because of those two men with very different stories.
Which two men?
The young man who his mother
The silent one.
had, yes, exactly.
Sure. Well, I'll try to see if I can answer that. The characters that I put in the book, I felt represented the spectrum of the varieties. Like you were saying earlier, there's different categories almost of need. And our job was to get to know the person and make an assessment of need. And we had what was called the most vulnerable list. And those were, we saw hundreds of people on the street, but the ones that we felt needed the immediate assistance, and that's the housing first, that's where that comes in. For those folks that do not volunteer any information and are not seeking help and will refuse it, even to the point of not even responding to you. There's a character in here who is a young man who has a psychotic break on the street, and he doesn't speak to anybody. And he starts losing his clothing. And finally, he's basically wearing garbage bags, and that is the time that we can get him in. It took that long. The crisis had to, and at that point we were able to help him out, but he probably wouldn't have taken an offer of housing even until he had his crisis out there. And literally, the community had to finally act. And I think that, and I saw this happen in different kinds of cases where afterwards, during the follow-up with what happened to that kid or that elderly woman, is that often they're grateful that somebody finally intervened. But in the case of the young man there, he was a real person. Every character I wrote in the book, I based on someone I knew and the situation and how it unfolded and where the challenge was. How do we solve this thing? So we found out later that he just had been hearing voices in his head that had told him, don't accept anything from anybody, don't talk to anybody, and that was the handcuffing him to the street. And it's hard to know exactly what's going on inside of a person and why, why they're doing what they're doing. But when you see someone and it's instinctual, that is in serious, serious trouble, and yet you can't really do anything about it, you find yourself like, a mechanic who sees clearly that I got to change this thing here, and then there isn't any part to change it. So in that case, there's a little scene in here with the politician. The street outreach worker gets a chance to tell a senator what he saw out there and what we need. And it speaks exactly to what you're talking about, the need for more housing and the need for more compassionate treatment centers. Yeah. Shelters are rough places. They've gotten nicer, I think, over the years, but the environment we're in has such an impact on us that creating a nicer environment with people who actually understand what's happening and work with people where they're at instead of trying to force them into stopping something. Although in the case of the kid, when they're almost naked on the street in the wintertime in Boston, you have to do something. It's a little different in Florida, the weather's better, but I don't know if they had a vulnerable list here. I'm sure if you talk to the people that work, or I don't know if there is an outreach team here in place yet, but they'll get their vulnerable list.
Yes.
Well, we're about out of time, but I thought maybe you could add a little bit more about what, here he was talking about this very interesting young man who ended up establishing his family connection, and that family member actually knew a senator and was able to make that connection. But what if you could give some final thoughts about what we as a community need to do to engage with the plan and some of your plans in the last minute or so?
As I mentioned, being an ambassador of the plan, I figure one that everyone can do for free is when you hear homelessness being something that's demonized or given negative connotations, speak up to the truth of that and just say, that could be your mom, or that could be you, or that could be all of us. And we have this real independent streak in America, and that's a good thing. But we also have this interconnectedness. We have this sort of caring for our brother, caring for our sister. So I think just speaking up is a very important thing to do. There are going to be a lot of opportunities, and I encourage people to sign up at stepupsarasota.org. You can sign up for additional information and to interact and to really add to this plan, make it smarter, make it truer, make it more achievable. That's really key. But I also say everyone's name is in here. Invisible ink, but everyone's name is in here because there's something in here for everyone to do. And as you'll understand some of our action steps we plan to take over the next 2 months, you can understand exactly how you can plug in. We see homelessness ended every day. One family, one person, a story happens, they get the voucher, they get the outreach team and finally connect. We see that miracle happen every day. There's a lot more to it, but we're comfortable that we are knowing how to and are going to bring the community together to be able to do it.
Well, thank you both so much. This has been an amazing conversation that I know we plan to continue in January. We'll be looking at other aspects of the plan. So we look forward to having you tune in with us again. My name again is Bonnie Silvestri, and I look forward to seeing you again on television. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Bonnie. Steve?